On my flight to Namibia, I was one of 2 Black people on the plane. And that is when I realized that on the tourism side of things, I was going to be in the minority for the entire trip. I'm used to being in predominantly white spaces, so that's not an issue for me. But what was kind of jarring was being in a place like Namibia or being in an African country and having the people around me kind of question or wonder what I was doing there.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. In case you're new here, my name is Maren.
And I'm Maureen.
Right, so in today's episode, you're going to be listening to a melanated sister who is going to be talking to us about her experience traveling through Africa. And I feel like I have to mention, because it's important, that she's first Nigerian, but she lives in America, New York.
Right, and what makes her experience so unique is because throughout East Africa and southern parts of Africa, safaris are predominantly known for white people, tourists, you know. So these are the places that she navigates, and she's telling us the kind of discriminations she faces while she travels to these places.
Not really discrimination, but she termed it as racism because, first of all, this is Africa,
Right.
and she was traveling through Africa, a predominantly melanated community, and a white man asks her what she's doing in Africa, all the way in Africa.
The irony.
Right, but guys, we don't want to talk a lot. Let's hear what she has to say, and then we come back and talk about it. You can let us know what you think about this episode on the comment section. Also consider subscribing if it's your first time here, right?
Let's watch.
Let's have an honest conversation about my experience solo traveling through Namibia as a Black woman. First, as a disclaimer, I in no way, shape, or form am trying to discourage travel to Namibia, travel to sub-Saharan Africa, safari trips, any of that nature. Namibia is the most beautiful country that I have stepped foot into, and I think it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I would not trade my trip for anything. I think everyone should experience it. So for context, I recently, I want to say 1 to 2 years ago, made a commitment to prioritize travel to countries that have populations of people that look like me. So traveling to countries where the native population is Black. You hear about the horror stories, people traveling to Italy and having racist experiences, people traveling to different parts of Europe and having negative experiences. And I just felt that I do not want to spend my hard-earned money going to places where I'm going to be mistreated. I'm not going to pay to be mistreated when I travel. On top of that, I feel like people generally do not know the beauty that Africa has and what it has to offer in terms of tourism. So me being in the position that I am, one, because I have a personal desire, but also because I have a desire to share it with other people online, decided that that is the type of travel that I wanted to prioritize. For additional context, I am Nigerian. The brunt of my experience or exposure to travel throughout Africa before going to places like Kenya, Zanzibar, South Africa, and now Namibia was based in West Africa. So primarily Nigeria and Ghana were the places in Africa that I had traveled to. I now know that travel to West Africa looks a lot different in terms of the demographic of people traveling there than travel to Southern Africa and even Eastern Africa. So if I get on a plane going to Lagos, I'm most likely getting on a plane full of Nigerian people. If I get on a plane to Accra, Ghana, I'm most likely getting on a plane full of Ghanaian people or people from the diaspora. I've never been to Senegal, but I imagine it's pretty similar. I've never been to the Ivory Coast, but I imagine it's pretty similar that travel to West Africa, because there isn't really too much of a safari culture or safari tourism, travel to those places typically tends to stay close to the people who are based in those locations or descendants of people from those locations, etc., etc. I thought it would be pretty similar going to other parts of Africa, but come to find out, on my flight to Namibia, I was one of 2 Black people on the plane. And that is when I realized that on the tourism side of things, I was going to be in the minority for the entire trip. I'm used to being in predominantly white spaces, so that's not an issue for me. But what was kind of jarring was being in a place like Namibia or being in an African country and having the people around me kind of question or wonder what I was doing there. So I'll give 3 anecdotes that paint a better picture of what I experienced. Number one, when I got on the plane from Johannesburg, South Africa to Namibia, as I've mentioned, I was one of 2 Black people on the plane. My seat was next to someone who was a Namibian national, but ethnically he was not Namibian. If you don't know, Namibia was a German colony for some time. And again, much like parts of South Africa, I'm starting to realize that unlike Nigeria, where I feel like colonists didn't just set up camp there, German colonists or German colonizers didn't necessarily go back. So that is to say that even though this man was a Namibian national, racially he was white. He struck up conversation with me, asked me where I was from, and I mentioned that I was from New York and Nigerian, and that's also a whole separate conversation. But essentially, where I say I'm from depends on the context and whether it's helpful to say I'm from America or from New York, or whether it'll be more helpful to say that I'm Nigerian or provide better context. Again, that's a whole separate thing that I think really illuminates the nuances that go into traveling the globe while Black. At any rate, once I described to him that I am from New York and Nigerian, he looks at me and asks me, well, what are you doing all the way here in Africa? I've never gotten asked that question before. I've never been asked while I was in Africa what I was doing in Africa, much less getting asked by a man who is white. And it took me back because I'm just like, I'm doing the same thing that every other person on this plane is doing and most people do when they come to Namibia. I'm here for tourism purposes, but also it's just like, if there's anywhere that I should be, in my humble opinion, it's probably Africa. So that was just like how do you not understand? Or not even a how do you not understand? I feel like it was in that moment, I was like, it is so rare to see Black people going to these places for the same types of trips as European counterparts go on, that I'm getting asked what I'm doing there. I don't think his question was insidious, and I don't think any of the people that I mentioned in this story or in my anecdotes were insidious or meant any harm. But again, I still do think it just shows the state of what it is like to travel while Black to these places. Before I move on to the second anecdote, I will say that once I landed in Namibia and met my tour guide, he was a Black Namibian man. And it was so funny because we had gotten to talking a little bit. I shared a little bit about where I'm from and da-da-da-da-da. And we got to speaking about race because I was like, I've already noticed or picked up on some things. And he was like, oh yeah. He was like, some people are going to see someone like you and they're going to expect to see a white man that follows, because it is not the case that a Black woman is here unless she is with a white man. And again, I think that says a lot. And I will add that the other people that I met on the trip that were Black women were there with their white partners. So he was right in that regard, at least for the little snippet of time that I was in Namibia. The second anecdote I'll give is on my last day in Namibia. I went on a leopard tracking drive, and on my truck there were 2 other couples. One was from the Netherlands and one was from Germany. During our sundowner, which is when we stopped to have drinks and snacks and just talk about the excitement of seeing leopards, we started sharing where we were from, going around, all of those things. And, they shared that they were from the Netherlands. They shared that another shared that they were from Germany. And of course, I'm there by myself. And I mentioned that I was from New York. And the woman from the Netherlands looked at me and asked me, are you Namibian? And I told her, no, I'm Nigerian, but I just really like traveling throughout Africa. Again, I don't think it was an insidious question, but I think it's very interesting that for them, it's, oh, you're in Namibia because you're tourists, but for me, I'm here because I'm Namibian. I can't be in the same space doing the same activity as you as the same type of traveler as you. Again, I don't think they meant any harm. I think it just goes to show how rare it is for a Black person like me to be on the type of trip that I was on. So much so that even other tourists pick up on that fact and kind of wonder, again, what are you doing here? It's actually the same theme as the first question from the guy on the plane. It's what are you doing here? Last anecdote I'll give, I was at the airport. My trip is done. I'm about to board a flight from Windhoek to Johannesburg. During the trip, I bought a fleece sweater from one of the lodges that I stayed at. And I was holding the fleece sweater in my hand because I probably was going to put it on the plane. And we're all standing in line to board. And another tourist taps me. And she goes, and she, she was. And she goes, oh, do you work there? And of course I was like, no, I stayed there. Again, I'm sure she meant no harm, or at least I would love to believe that, but she smiled, she was cute, you know, I'm sure she meant no harm. But again, I can't help but wonder that if I looked like her and was holding the exact same sweater, that her question might have been, oh, did you stay there instead of do you work there? The context we were in was an airport full of other tourists, and so the chances that I was simply another tourist was really high, especially considering what I was wearing compared to what everyone else was wearing as well. But the first inclination on her part was to think that I worked there. And the first inclination on the other tourist part was to ask or to think that I was Namibian. And the first inclination of that other man's part was to ask, what are you doing here? I definitely understand the barriers to enjoying and experiencing a type of trip like this. One, the distance from New York to Namibia. Two, the cost of a trip like this. Three, there's the general interest in just seeing wildlife and seeing the beauty of Namibia. Never mind the structures that make it easier for people from Europe to travel over people within the African continent. This will not stop my desire to experience safaris in other countries, though I imagine the experience is probably going to be similar, just in terms of being the minority, just in terms of people trying to place me and guess what I'm doing there. So in this very long 10-minute video, I figured it was at least worth discussing.
So guys, welcome back. Let us know what you think about this episode on the comment section, yeah? Guys, do you remember there was an episode we did for those ones who are with us since the day we started reactions, yeah? And we kept saying, Black Americans, don't allow white people to tell you Africa is like this, Africa is like that, or to tell you don't come to Africa because of insecurities. There was one video we did where a Black American traveled to Tanzania, and
in the whole plane, he was the only Black person in that plane, and the rest were white people.
So my question is, if Africa is such a bad place the way they make you believe, yeah, why is it that the whole plane is filled by white people? That is something you need to ponder on. Another thing I have to say is that, as we mentioned also, safaris are activities that majorly is enjoyed by white people for some reason. Black people are not doing safaris.
I feel like natives from Africa, they usually don't go to these safari parks because most of them
can't afford it.
When you have something in your home, you don't take advantage of it because it's already there.
But also, remember also a big population in Africa cannot afford these things like safaris. So much as we have the resources, you're not really enjoying them. So it has to be done by foreigners. And unfortunately, these foreigners the large amount of them are white people. So while they're telling you how Africa is very unsafe and people get kidnapped, you stay in America, just know that they're filling planes to come to Africa to enjoy the beautiful resources.
To drink margaritas while watching our lions. But that is beside the point. So you find sisters like this Nigerian sister who can actually afford it and comes to these spaces, and most of them, the way they handle themselves in America is the same way they handle themselves here. And if you find the ones that consider themselves native to this land, the white people, they also behave the same way, like their DNA are wired the same. They're behaving the same way with white people in America, in that they also will ask these kind of Black people who can also afford the same services as them why they're there and what they're doing there.
The level of entitlement.
Yes, some will do it out of malice, some will do it innocently because they're not used to seeing Black people there, you know,
in those spaces.
Yeah, but I feel like the point of ignorance is when some of these, especially the female tourists, asks people like her if they're there to serve them, and they can clearly see they're all dressed in holiday attires.
Right. And guys, another thing also I have to mention is, let me talk about Kenya because we are from Kenya and this is our country. So we've normally heard about experiences in white spaces in Kenya. You'd find them in maybe say places where you have beaches.
Yeah.
For example, the coastal areas of
resorts
Kenya
that are near beaches in coastal places in Kenya.
And then I don't know how many of you know about Masai Mara, because I feel like it's such a touristic the kind of marketing
it's one of the most famous places here in Kenya.
Yeah, and even before we had YouTube and whatnot, things like Nat Geo used to showcase Masai Mara and all that. So I feel like that is a good example to use because it's well known. So you find like activities like going to the Mara, a lot of people who are normally going there are white people, yeah? So when you find a black person in a van filled by white people, of course, at the back of their mind, they're asking themselves, what is this person doing here? And we've had stories from the coastal region where people talk about going to resorts, and I know this for a fact that there's some certain resorts that deny black Kenyans entry because it's only for whites. And that is a resort here in Kenya.
Right, because there's also another YouTuber, I don't know how many of you know her, but I'm sure some of you know her. She's called Miss Trudy. She also was explaining the same thing you said, whereby they were refused service because they were black, and white people literally were gaining entry to that place, right? And most Kenyans actually explain this to be the fact that Kenyans usually give service to white people because they think they'll be tipped more than if they serve
white
black
people have money.
Right.
So another thing, guys, we needed to talk about is the fact that let's take a look at the behaviors of the white people who live in Africa. We can talk about the generational white people who were born in Africa, or maybe their grandfathers came here during colonization, those types of Africans. These people are very defensive and they're very protective of what they own, meaning they normally don't like to see black people. It doesn't matter if you're an African native or a black tourist. They normally don't like interacting with them in terms of what are they doing in our space, and just the thought of them enjoying the same services that they get to enjoy. It brings problems. When you look at South Africa, it's the same thing they're going through, because you find that white South Africa and black South Africa, what brings that divide is the fact that white South Africa feel like they need to have a good part of town that they don't want to share with the black South Africans, and that is why they were calling for the division of the Western Cape. Because they were saying they didn't want the black South Africans to enter Western Cape, and
because they would bring crime.
Exactly, they would bring crime. But who is to say, have you never seen a white person who does crime in South Africa? Have you never seen such cases? Only that they will talk about the black people because of racism,
But you know, right now I'm really glad that black travelers, whenever they want to travel, right now most of them, compared to like 5-6 years ago, are considering African countries. And I think this is what will begin changing such treatments in Africa. If Africans and other black people start being going to those places and acting like they belong.
And what I'm happy about is that a lot of black Americans right now are coming into Africa, and I feel like they're gonna dilute that concentration of white people, because my concern was, I don't have anything against white people, but you have to think about the situation in America,
especially their history. Wherever they go, which is not bad, they tend to, want to take up more than what is owed to them, the white ones.
No, it's bad, because think about the native African who lives here and the native Kenyan.
They want to dominate those spaces, and dominating is not bad. The bad the bad thing is when they come and push people who rightfully belong there out so that they can have those properties for themselves.
And that creates segregation, and that creates unfair treatment, and that creates racism, because there's also a place in Kenya called Laikipia. For those who don't know, you can look it up, or you can go to a channel called Lingugi Network, because she had a documentary about this. There are white people who came into Kenya during colonization time.
Is it 60% of Laikipian land?
Exactly. And this land, they didn't buy it. There was one white person who was talking about how they acquired, was it 10 acres of land? And these 10 acres of land, they didn't pay anything for it. And up to now, their generations are still enjoying the benefits. And whatever happened to the people who owned that land before they grabbed it?
They were taken to concentration camps.
And some of them still live to date. And if you want to watch that documentary, you can look it up on Lingugi, Laikipia. There are people who survived, who are still alive right now and they were giving their accounts, these people are still bitter today because just imagine they were living on those lands and the white people came and grabbed it. And up to today, they have to sit down and watch these people enjoy that land and there's nothing they can do to get it back, you know.
Sometimes I often wonder when white people ask black people, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Sometimes I feel like they're usually afraid that black people will concentrate in those areas and hence they're the ones who will be pushed out. So they tend to guard.
That is exactly
heavily.
it. You know, guys, I came across a video on TikTok of a black South African who was talking about how deeply they regret. She was blaming her government because she was saying when apartheid ended, what the government should have done is kick out all white people who came into their lands illegally.
And especially grabbed land.
Everybody should have been kicked out. And she was so bitter about this because Orania is a white-only town in South Africa. This is a predominantly black area, but it's a white-only, meaning black people are not allowed. You can never step foot in Orania. And if you do, you have to be maybe a servant, you see, or you're going to
deliver
with permission,
stuff
of
like
course.
that, yeah.
Things like that. So she was angry because Orania was not a secret. Everybody knew about Orania, but because of the other town, white South African, not town, but settlement that is developing called Clairefontaine. It's called Clairefontaine. So now this is a second white settlement in South Africa where they've labeled whites only and they're not allowing black people. So imagine if we have such settlements in Africa and then it becomes a widespread thing, the whole of Africa. It's not going to be belonging to black people.
Yeah,
Slowly
whatever
by
is
slowly,
happening in the Middle East right now, whatever
the
is
country
happening
that
there
starts with P we cannot mention.
Yeah, so that is the exact same thing that will start to
Africans
happen in
will
Africa
face.
because those same white people will feel like that land rightfully belongs to them. So guys, let us know what you think about this episode. Also consider subscribing if you have not subscribed yet, right? And we'll see you on our next episode.